Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine the 2nd of July of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. First we're going to start with the south region. The Russians increased the level of control on the Crimea bridge, and basically we understand that this situation is connected with possible attacks of Ukrainians on the bridge, as the Ukrainians made during the autumn of the previous year. Of course, the Ukrainians will try to destroy this bridge one more time during or before the second round of the greatest counteroffensive operation. Also, the Ukrainians made another massive missile attack upon the Russian airfields and so on. The Russians' air defense worked well, and as a result of another missile attack, the Russians managed to shut down the Ukrainians' missile, probably Storm Shadow. There was a very heavy explosion, and there was a very big results of that explosions. Anyway, also today we got report that the Russians managed to shut down the Ukrainian Su-25 airplane in the vicinity of Orekhov. So this airplane was destroyed in the vicinity of Novopavlovka, between Novopavlovka and Orekhov, and basically we know that when the Ukrainians attack using Storm Shadows, they use the aircraft pairs. They use Su-25 as a plane that covers and protects the Su-24, and as we see, according to this update, that the Russians managed to destroy Su-25. So basically Su-27, Su-24 managed to escape the attack. As you can see, the distance of attack is around 259 kilometers or 260 kilometers. So these facts tell us that Ukrainians were using Storm Shadow missiles, and they were using for those purposes Su-24 that was modernized during the previous months in the Western countries to use Storm Shadow missiles. Now we are moving to Kherson area. The Minister of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of fierce fightings, the Russians managed to push the Ukrainians from Antonov bridgehead, and that Ukrainians were forced to step back. Maybe there are still some soldiers that are hiding currently among the buildings, among the residential area. The Russians published the video how they were sending the marine troopers using the boats on the rivers. There are like 3 boats were heading in direction of Antonov Bridge, and the Russians completed the clearing operation. But some sources on the ground, some officers on the ground, soldiers on the ground are saying that the picture that was described by the Ministry of Defense, it's not so beautiful as they described. Currently there are still Ukrainians. Currently it is very difficult for the Russians to complete the clearing operation, at least the edge positions along the Dnipro River, because the Ukrainians have possibilities using artillery and sniper or every type of weapon they have to attack the Russians during the clearing operation. Also today the Ukrainians published another video, geolocated video. Maybe this event took place not today but yesterday and the day before yesterday, but today we just got geolocation that Ukrainians attacked the Russians in the Oleshki settlement. As you can see, there was a truck and the Russians were trying to get some, maybe they brought some supply, and the Ukrainian drone discovered them and attacked those soldiers using the drones and using the bombing method. The Russians reported as a result of fierce fightings on this bridgehead, the Ukrainians lost 20 soldiers, 2 armored vehicles and 2 artillery systems M777 howitzers. Now we are moving further to Orekhov bridgehead, to South Donetsk, to Zaporozhye area. Today we got a lot of updates, and one of them, as we discussed, the Russians shut down Su-25 that probably were trying to cover and protect Su-24. Furthermore, the Russians reported that during the previous day they attacked and bombed positions of 33rd Brigade in the vicinity of Petykhatki and in the vicinity of Gulyai-Polye. There were no active clashes and any storming operation of the Ukrainians in the vicinity of Stepovo Petykhatki. There was like a silent day from Ukrainian side, and we got today a lot of updates from Bradley Square, from the area between Orekhov and, let's say, Tokmak, in the vicinity of Robotyne. The Ukrainians made a lot of attempts to attack the Russian positions in Robotyne, and today, according to the Russian military experts, the Ukrainians managed to achieve some success during those attacks. So let's discuss this step by step. First, we're going to start with the area in the vicinity of Novopokrovka. I have added this icon of flag, Russian flag, and basically according to videos we published in the previous materials, the Russians controls not just the line along the along these black dots. The Russians control also the trenches line and the forest line a little bit to the west, and this piece of information is confirmed by the geolocations video that we published during the previous days. From the Ukrainian side, we got a video how they were attacking Russian positions using drones. There was a trenches in the vicinity of that settlement, and the Ukrainians, as you can see, made a small attack using drone. There was few soldiers, probably they were wounded or something like this. And now we are moving to Robotyne. The Ukrainians published another video, geolocated video, on the 30th of June. This video shows how the Ukrainians were moving along the fields of ruined and destroyed armored vehicles. As you can see, it's like graves and a cemetery of destroyed armored vehicles. And as you can see, the Ukrainians stopped using personal infantry carriers at all. Basically, they're using just the infantry, because personal carriers is a very nice target and very taste target for the Russian artillery and Russian drone. And using infantry, as I understand, reduce the level of loss among the Western weapon, and maybe even reduce the level of loss among the Ukrainian infantry. So basically, the Ukrainians during the previous day were trying to attack the Robotyne, and currently, according to Rybary, the Russian military expert, the Ukrainians managed to enter the first defense line, the first defense belt that was built by the Russians during the previous months, and currently there are very heavy clashes for this territory. So basically, this is Robotyne, and I will try to add on the map the trenches and the trenches that are under Ukrainian control, and those ones that are under Russian control. So during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians, as I understand, according to the report we have, established control over this forest line that located right in front of Robotyne. Also, there are other trenches that still under Ukrainian Russian control, and we are talking about this trenches line. This is the main trenches line that the Russians were using to supply and support the trenches that was taken by the Ukrainians. Also, the Russians controls the second defense forest line, the defense belt in this area, and these two also under Russian control. So basically, the Ukrainians currently are sending more and more reserves, more and more infantry with one purpose: to dig in deeper on the first defense belt in this area. They need these trenches very much, because based on these trenches, the Ukrainians will continue their offensive operation in the direction of Robotyne. And if you remember, during the previous few videos, I told you that maybe the next few days we're going to see the battle for Robotyne, and currently we start seeing this situation. The Ukrainians have entered the first defense line. During the day, we got confirmed information from the Russian sources that they captured the first defense line, and currently the Ukrainians are trying to enter and to attack the Russians in the main defense belt that the Russians use to supply and support the other trenches on this territory. The Russians have already moved the reserves in this direction, and currently they're counter-attacking the Ukrainians, trying to push them back from this defense belt. And for these purposes, of course, the Russians have more types of weapon. They can use armored vehicles, they can use tank support, personal carriers support, and infantry. And the Ukrainians currently don't have such possibilities, because most of armored vehicles were destroyed during the passage by the way from Nova Danilovka to the first defense belt. Now we are moving further to the Avdiivka tactical bridgehead. The Russians reported that during the day, the Ukrainians made a lot of attempts to attack on the line between Livadnaya and Priyutne, this area. The Ukrainians made at least 3 attempts to attack this settlement. The first attempt took place at 5 a.m., the second one at 11 a.m., and the third one at 3 p.m. of the local time. All those attempts were repelled by the Russians. The Ukrainians had significant losses among armored vehicles. Around 20 units of different types of armored vehicles were destroyed during those attacks, and the Ukrainians were forced to step back. From the north, the Ukrainians made the same attempt to attack from the line between Novodarivka-Rovnopol to the south, using commando squad that was discovered and destroyed by the Russians reserve that were moved to this area as soon as the Ukrainian commando squad was discovered. Furthermore, the Ukrainians from their side published the video how they were bombing and shelling Russian positions in Novozlatopol and in the vicinity of Lyubimovka. For example, on this area, we see how the Ukrainians using artillery destroyed at least one Russian armored vehicles on this interception of road. And so it's a very heavy explosion. So the Ukrainians try to attack the Russians' back positions, their reserves, and not to allow them to send reinforcement. On this video, we see the destroy of Msta S. And one more thing, maybe there is a very high chances that these videos are not dated to the 2nd of July. Maybe they was made like a day ago, or maybe the previous night, or maybe 2 days ago. The basic thing that I would like to just explain you with these videos is geolocation and to confirm the current situation on the front line. Another attack of Ukrainian drone took place in Novozlatopol. The Russians were hiding their armored vehicle inside of the building. The Ukrainians managed to discover, and using artillery, they attacked this area and destroyed Russian armored vehicle right in front, or right on the combat line. The Russians reported they also attacked positions of the Ukrainian accumulation forces in Makarovka. The Ukrainians haven't made any attempt to attack the Russians from the line between Makarovka and Novodonetsk. Recently, as we know, during the previous week, they had a lot of losses, and currently they still need time to continue regrouping. Now we're moving to South Donetsk area. The Ukrainians made attempt to attack Russian positions from Ugledar, but we haven't received any updates about the number of forces that took place in that operation. Just the Russians reported that they repelled that attack. The Minister of Defense of Russian Federation reported that the total Ukrainian losses from Petsikhatki to Ugledar were around 150 soldiers, 8 armored vehicles, including 1 tank and 1 artillery system FH-70, and these losses took place during the previous 24 hours. Now we are moving to Donetsk area, and we're going to talk about Novomykhailovka, this area. The Russians reported that they repelled attack of the Ukrainians in the vicinity of Novomykhailovka. Currently, the Ukrainians are using the active defense tactics. We know that during the previous days, the Russians captured a lot of trenches in this area, and currently the Russians are trying to develop their bridgehead to the south, and they're trying to establish operational encirclement, or even on the operational level in the near future, to establish operational encirclement of Novomykhailovka. The Ukrainians are trying to counterattack, and currently, according to the Russian sources, there are very fierce fightings exactly for this bridgehead. I will add the polygon for better understanding. Currently, the Russians are trying to develop their bridgehead and to establish control over this gray cloud, and Ukrainians counterattacks in this area, trying to slow down and to push the Russians back. There are very fierce fightings, and this is a vital area for both sides, either for the Russians or for the Ukrainians. If the Russians are able to capture this bridgehead, they will establish physical fire control, artillery control over this Novomykhailovka stronghold, and this can ruin the entire Ukrainian plans about the offensive operation in Vremivka tactical bridgehead, because I'm not sure that Ukrainians are ready to defend themselves against such attack from the eastern flank to the western direction. And also, the Russians report the repelled attack in the vicinity of Mariinka. The Ukrainians continue sending their reserves of 79th Air Assault Brigade, but the Russians hold this territory, but without any progress on the ground for both sides. Now we are moving to Avdiivka bridgehead. The Ukrainians made a lot of attempts to attack the Russians in the vicinity of Vadianne, in the vicinity between Severna and Opytne. Also, the Russians published the video how they managed to discover and to destroy the Ukrainian commando squad during the night. This video is geolocated, and this video for another time confirms the control of Ukrainians of this territory. As you can see, the Russians were attacking this squad using the man-pods, and as a result of that attack, the Ukrainians haven't seen the rocket almost till the hit, and after that we see that the missile got exactly in target. There were no updates about any fightings in the vicinity of Krasnogorovka and Veselaya, probably as a result of battles during the previous days. Currently, both sides need some time for regrouping, but we expect that within the next few days both sides will restart their offensive operation. The Russians need to return control over the forest lines and this area between Krasnogorovka and Veselaya, and to restore the normal connection between these two settlements. And of course, from the Ukrainian side. The Ukrainians need to return control over Vysyola and to encircle and establish some operational encirclement over Krasnogorovka. So both sides have vital goals in this area. Now we are moving to Artyomovsk, and today we got crazy updates from this bridgehead. Some Western sources reported that as a result of storming operation and fierce fightings, the Ukrainians managed to capture the southwestern trenches of Klishchiivka. The Russian sources haven't confirmed this yet. The only thing that the Russians have published that there are very heavy clashes for these trenches. There are still very heavy clashes, and maybe this territory is in the gray zone and that the Russians still have access there. The Ukrainians couldn't dig deep in this area, and but anyway, this is a very bad piece of news, because these trenches were one of the most powerful trenches on this bridgehead, and if this piece of information is correct, then according to this piece of news, the Ukrainians managed to establish control over this territory, and currently there's just one field left before the next Russian trenches, and the next Russian defense line goes along this forest. There are also a lot of trenches, a lot of fortifications. The Ukraine is currently located on this area, if this piece of information is correct. I believe that in a day or two we're going to receive more geolocated videos and more updates about this territory. And currently, if that information was correct, the Ukrainians have at least two possible next solutions. The first one is to storm this area in front, and the second option is to go to the south and to try to develop their offensive operation in direction of Avdiivka and to cut connection between Kurdyumovka, Zelenopolye with the northern area, and to reduce the Russian logistic possibilities and to ease the movements and the pressure of 28th and 24th Mechanized Brigade, who attacks in this direction separately. When talking about the western part, southwestern part of Klishchiivka, this is the area of responsibilities of 3rd Assault Brigade. When talking about the northern trenches, this one, the strongest trenches, this is the area of responsibility of 5th Assault Brigade. When talking about the area Kurdyumovka, Zaryanovka, these are areas of responsibilities of 28th and 24th Mechanized Brigade. So if the Ukrainians want to ease the life of 28th and 24th, they need to attack to the south in direction of Avdiivka, and then we can see a real collapse of the Russians' defense belt in this area, and the Ukrainians will enter this settlement, and then there are going to be very heavy clashes. For now, the Russians controls for 100% these two settlements, and as I told you, there are still clashes for these areas, for these fortifications between Klishchiivka and the channel. The Russians reported that as a result of fierce fightings on Donetsk front line during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians lost up to 1 battalion, 360 soldiers, 19 armored vehicles, including 6 tanks and 3 artillery systems. Furthermore, during the day, the Ukrainians made a lot of attempts to attack in direction of Berkhovka, and there was some video from Yahidne that probably we will geolocate and publish tomorrow in the next video. And when the Ukrainians tried to attack in direction of Berkhovka and Yahidne, the Russians from their side always attacked the Ukrainians from Dubovo-Vasilievka in direction of the supply road that goes from Grigorievka to Bogdanovka. I don't think that the Russians do have possibilities to establish control over this supply road. They're doing this attack to pin down and to slow down the Ukrainians and to force them to always to look back and to step back. And every time the Ukrainians stop offensive in Berkhovka, the Russians retreated back to the bridgehead in the forest between Dubovo-Vasilievka and Bogdanovka. But you know that anything can happen, and if the Russians are able during one of those attacks to establish control over this territory, of course this is going to be a collapse of any Ukrainian attempt to break through the northern flank of Artyomovsk. And the Russians currently are doing this, but for now they're doing this just to slow down and to stop the Ukrainians who attacks along the railroad ways in direction of Berkhovka and Yahidne. And for now they was pretty successful in those attacks. Now we are moving to the north to Siversk bridgehead. We haven't received any updates, any piece of news regarding Ukrainian attempts to attack from Razdolovka. Recently, the previous few days, there were a lot of attacks, but now today there were no. Maybe there was some recon combats, but those attacks weren't mentioned by any authorities. And now we are moving to Lyman frontline. The Russians reported they attack and bomb and destroy the positions of 95th and 92nd Brigades in the vicinity of Siversk and Grigorievka. There are heavy clashes in Kremenaya forest in the vicinity of Dubrovo, Tarskoye. The Russians destroyed the Ukrainian positions in the Ukrainian commandos squad in the vicinity of Kuzmina. Also, the Russians published the video how they were bombing the Ukrainian positions. This is a very fresh video. So basically this video confirms the front line. This video is geolocated. So basically, as you can see, there is a line. This forest is split in many parts, many squares, and the Russians were bombing these parts. So basically it confirms that this territory, this part of the forest, still under Ukrainian control. The Russians reported that as a result of fierce fightings in this area, the Ukrainians lost 95 soldiers, 5 armored vehicles, including 1 tank and 2 artillery systems. Now we are moving to the north to the Kupiansk front line. The Russians reported that during the previous day, the Russians destroyed at least 2 ammo depots of Ukrainians in Kislovka. Now on this video we see the Ukrainian light vehicle that brought some munition to some warehouse, and the soldiers started and after that this munition was destroyed by the Russian Krasnopol shell. Furthermore, the Russians reported that the famous 92nd Mechanized Brigade, this is Mechanized Brigade, started the process of disbandment because of heavy losses that this brigade got during the previous months of clashes on this bridgehead. Currently, the Ukrainian sources are saying that this information was provided by the Russians, that the rest of forces of that brigade currently is redeployed and involved into different types of brigades on this front line. And basically we can say that the story of 92nd Brigade has ended on the Kupiansk front line. For now, this information of course is not confirmed by many sources, but this is the first the first piece of information regarding the destiny of this 92nd Mechanized Brigade. Also, the Russians reported they bombed and attacked the Ukrainian forces on the railroad ways in Balaklia and Chuguyev. The Ukrainians were trying to redeploy some forces. They were spotted, discovered, and they were destroyed. And now we are moving to the most important update, I believe, for today. And we're going to talk about the Polish forces on the border with Belarus. If you remember, recently a lot of Wagner forces was redeployed in Belarus. There was a build-a camp. We discussed this many times. And today the Polish the head of Ministry of Internal Affairs of Poland announced that 500 police officers, 5,000 border guards, and 2,000 soldiers are being pulled up to the border with Belarus. And as you can see, according to these numbers, it's already 2 brigades were redeployed on the border with Belarus. But the thing is that border with Belarus, for example, near Brest, is also border with Ukraine. So basically, they're saying that they redeployed the force in border with Belarus, but basically on the facts that the Polish forces, 2 Polish brigades were redeployed in the border with Ukraine. And believe me, for them, it's even maybe faster to enter Ukraine than to enter Belarus on these positions. So everything we're talking about, like the Battle of Kovel and the Wagners against Polish forces is coming true. On the 11th and 12th of July, we're going to see the summit in NATO. Before that, we're going to see a lot of terrible events, I believe so, and then we're going to see, let's say, the next chapter of the special military operation. And another thing is that the United States of America have redeployed to the Europe. There we see 135 constant Phoenix aircraft. These aircraft arrived in Europe to take atmospheric air samples and detect radioactive emissions. And all these things were done and are done for one purpose: to start redeployment of NATO forces to the western part of Ukraine after, I believe, unsuccessful attempt from the Ukrainian side to attack and to start the second round of greatest counteroffensive operation. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.